The jungle does not care about your theology. It does not soften because you are sincere. It does not grow quiet because you are young. It does not stop the insects, the rain, the fever, or the fear simply because you came in Jesus' name. And yet, in the middle of that green world, where rivers are roads and the canopy feels like a ceiling, one woman chose to take a step that still sounds impossible. She went back. Not back to a comfortable mission station, back toward the people connected to her worst day, back toward the tribe whose name had become a warning to outsiders, back with a small child in her arms, back not to take revenge, but to carry forgiveness. Her name was Elisabeth Elliot, and her story is one of the most striking examples of obedience, grief, courage, and long faithfulness in modern Christian history. A calling that grew before the tragedy. Elisabeth Elliot wasn't born famous. She wasn't raised as a celebrity Christian voice. She was born in 1926 in a family where mission work wasn't a romantic idea. It was normal life. Her parents served abroad, and the thought that Jesus could send you anywhere was woven into her imagination early. She studied at Wheaton College and graduated in 1948, but what she carried out of that season wasn't only education, it was resolve. The kind of resolve that looks at a map and refuses to let it remain just ink on paper. By the early 1950s, she was in Ecuador, not visiting, serving, learning, working, living among people whose language and customs were not her own. Wheaton's memorial notes that she served the Quechua and later the Waodani peoples of Ecuador across the years that shaped her life, 1952 to 1963. That matters because many people only meet Elisabeth Elliot in the moment of her widowhood, but she was already a missionary before she became a missionary widow. She had already chosen hardship before tragedy made her famous. The story that made the world look at Ecuador. There is a chapter in her life that changed everything, especially the year 1956. A small group of missionaries, among them her husband Jim Elliot, became part of an outreach effort toward the Waodani, a people group widely believed at the time to be extremely dangerous to outsiders. The plan involved long preparation, months of attempts at communication, including aerial gift drops, and then a direct approach at a river sandbar camp, often called Palm Beach. On January 8, 1956, the attempt ended in blood. Jim Elliot and 5 other missionaries were killed. And just like that, Elisabeth Elliot's life was split into before and after. She was a young widow. She had a baby daughter, Valerie, still very small. The future she had imagined was gone, and a new future arrived she never asked for. There are tragedies that don't only break your heart, they put your faith on trial. Because now the Christian slogans have to become real, real enough to hold a grieving mother in the jungle. Elisabeth didn't hide the story, she wrote it. In 1957, she published Through Gates of Splendor, an account of the 5 missionaries and the events surrounding their deaths. That book mattered for 2 reasons. First, it preserved the story for the world. Second, it transformed grief into mission mobilization. For countless readers, her writing made the idea of missionary sacrifice vivid and personal, not abstract. The tragedy didn't become entertainment, it became a call. The gospel is worth everything. And Elisabeth's influence began to expand beyond Ecuador's rivers. Her pen became a second mission field, a field with no borders. But then came the part of her life that still makes people pause. In 1958, Elisabeth Elliot returned to the rainforest to live among the Waodani, alongside Rachel Saint, Nate Saint's sister. Multiple historical summaries highlight this. She didn't just forgive from afar, she chose to live among the very community associated with her loss. Try to feel what that meant. It meant walking into a place where the memory of violence was not theory. It meant raising a child in a setting where outsiders once died. It meant choosing proximity over protection. Forgiveness is easy to admire from a distance, but when forgiveness becomes proximity, when you share food, space, language, and daily life with people tied to your trauma, then forgiveness stops being a word. It becomes a life. This wasn't naive, it wasn't sentimental, it was deliberate Christian courage. And it was costly, because the cost wasn't only physical discomfort, it was emotional warfare. It was choosing not to let pain dictate the boundaries of obedience. Some accounts describe her return as a catalyst for change in relationships and patterns of violence. And while any honest historian will note that community transformation is always complex, sources consistently treat her return as one of the most powerful modern examples of lived Christian forgiveness. The long labor, not just a dramatic moment, but years of formation. Elisabeth's story isn't only the dramatic return, it's what came after. She continued her missionary work, her language engagement, and her discipleship labor, and later she carried what she learned about suffering, obedience, and trust into the wider church. Over time, she became known not only as a missionary, but as a teacher and author whose themes were consistent: obedience when it is costly, trust when God feels silent, surrender when life is unfair, faithfulness when results are slow. She wrote many books. Wheaton notes she authored more than 30. Her writing wasn't shallow inspiration, it had weight, the weight of a woman who had lived what she was saying. And then she became a voice through radio. Her program, Gateway to Joy, ran for years, commonly summarized as 1988 to 2001, carrying daily discipleship into the homes of listeners who would never step into a rainforest. In other words, her mission expanded from Ecuador's jungle to global Christian imagination, not by changing her message, but by changing her medium. The sacrifices that followed her through life. Most people recognize her sacrifice in widowhood. That is real, and it never stops being real. But her cost was broader than one tragedy. She paid the cost of single motherhood in hard places. She paid the cost of carrying public influence, which always invites critique. She paid the cost of speaking boldly on themes like suffering and submission, themes that often provoke strong reactions. And in later life, she faced dementia, eventually stepping back from public ministry as her capacity diminished. This is an important final note. Some people finish life in strength, others finish in a slow narrowing. Her life shows that impact is not only what you do when you are strong, it is also what you endure when you are weak, still trusting Christ. What her life changed. Elisabeth Elliot's impact is hard to measure because it is not only institutional, it is spiritual. She shaped modern mission imagination. Her 1957 narrative helped define how many evangelicals thought about sacrifice and martyrdom in mission. She became a living illustration of forgiveness that refuses to remain theoretical. Her return in 1958 is still cited because it dramatizes the gospel in a way arguments cannot. She discipled millions through books and radio, teaching a generation that faith is not a feeling, but a decision to obey.
And she did this not by presenting herself as unbreakable, but by showing that obedience can continue even after a heart has been broken. The final picture. So if you want to remember Elisabeth Elliot rightly, remember her like this: a woman who believed obedience mattered more than ease, a widow who carried grief without letting grief cancel mission, a mother who walked back into the rainforest with a child, a writer whose pen turned tragedy into a global call, and a teacher whose steady voice shaped discipleship for decades. And her story leaves us with one question: do we only admire costly obedience, or will we practice it?